So after you write your counterargument and your rebuttal paragraphs, then you want to write and back up those paragraphs with, well, so what? Who cares? In other words, what real-life implications does your topic have? How can you apply your topic, or your counterargument to the real world? Why should anyone care about your topic? So here's some examples. Baseball is a national pastime. Bernini was the best sculptor of the Baroque period. All writing is conversational. So what? Who cares? Why does any of this matter? How many times have you had reason to ask these questions? Regardless of how interesting a topic may be to you as a writer, readers always need to know what is at stake in a text for them. What do they get out of it? Why should they care? All too often, however, these questions are left unanswered, mainly because writers and speakers assume that audiences will know the answers already, or figure them out on their own. As a result, students come away from lectures feeling like outsiders to what they've just heard, just as many of us feel left hanging after talks we've attended. The problem is not necessarily that the speakers lack a clear, well-focused thesis, or that the thesis is inadequately supported with evidence. Instead, the problem is that the speakers don't address the crucial question of why their arguments matter. This is the question that is so often left unaddressed. This is unfortunate, since speakers generally could offer interesting, engaging answers. When pressed, for instance, most academics will tell you that their lectures and articles matter because they address some belief that needs to be corrected or updated, and because their arguments have important real-world consequences. Yet, many academics fail to identify these reasons and consequences explicitly in what they say and write, rather than assume that audiences will know why their claims matter. All writers need to answer the "so what? Who cares?" question up front. Not everyone can claim to have a cure for cancer or a solution to end poverty, but writers who fail to show that others should care or already do care about their claims will ultimately lose their audience's interest. So this has obviously got to do with pathos. When you want to hook, remember I said that in order to have a good argument, you have to have good ethos, pathos, and logos. And so having a good counter-argument and rebuttal paragraph, well, that adds to your ethos. And having good in-text citation also adds to your ethos, as well as logos. But pathos, why should anybody care about what you write? Okay, so what? Who cares? That's the pathos, appeal to emotion. So when you have all three appeals, ethos, pathos, and logos, then you have a good argument. So this chapter focuses on various moves that you can make to answer the who cares and so what questions in your own writing. In other words, pathos, appeal to emotion. In one sense, the two questions get at the same thing, the relevance or importance of what you are saying, of why the reader should care. Yet they get at this significance in different ways. Whereas who cares literally asks you to identify a person or group who cares about your claims, so what asks about the real-world applications and consequences of those claims. What difference it would make if they were accepted. In other words, after your reader reads your essay, how does that change the reader's world? So who cares? To see how one writer answers the who cares question, consider the following passage from the science writer Denise Grady, as she explains her latest research into fat cells. Scientists used to think body fat and the cells it was made of were pretty much inert, just an oily storage compartment. But within the last decade, research has shown that fat cells act like chemical factories, and that body fat is a potent stuff, a highly active tissue that secretes hormones and other substances with profound and sometimes harmful effects. In recent years, biologists have begun calling fat an endocrine organ, comparing it to glands like the thyroid and pituitary, which also releases hormones straight into the bloodstream. Notice how Grady's writing reflects the central advice we give in this book, offering a clear claim and also framing that claim as a response to what someone else has said. In so doing, Grady immediately identifies at least one group with a stake in the new research that sees fat as active, potent stuff, namely the scientific community, which formerly believed that body fat is inert. By referring to these scientists, Grady implicitly acknowledges that her text is part of a larger conversation and shows who besides herself has an interest in what she says. Consider, however, how the passage would read had Grady left out what scientists used to think and simply explained the new findings in isolation. Within the past few decades, research has shown that fat cells act like chemical factories and that body fat is potent stuff, a highly active tissue that secretes hormones and other substances. In recent years, biologists have begun calling fat an endocrine organ, comparing it to glands like the thyroid and pituitary, which also release hormones straight into the bloodstream. Though the statement is clear and easy to follow, it lacks any indication that anyone needs to hear it. Okay, one nods while reading this passage. Fat is an active, potent thing. Sounds good, but who cares? Does anyone really care? So to address the who cares question in your writing, we suggest using templates like the following, which echo Grady in refuting earlier thinking. Parents used to think spanking was necessary, but recently experts suggest that it can be counterproductive. This interpretation challenges the work of those critics who have long assumed that. These findings challenge the work of earlier researchers who tended to assume that. Recent studies like these shed new light on which previous studies had not addressed. Grady might have been more explicit by writing the who cares into her text, but who really cares? Who besides me and a handful of recent researchers has a stake in these claims? At the very least, the researchers who formerly believed should care. And to gain greater authority as a writer, it can help to name specific people or groups who have a stake in your claims and to get some detail about their views. Researchers have long assumed that. For instance, one eminent scholar of cell biology, blank, assumed in her seminal work on cell structures and functions that fat cells, as so-and-so herself puts it. Another leading scientist argued that fat cells, ultimately when it comes to the nature of fat, basic assumption was that. But a new body of research shows that fat cells are far more complex than that. In other cases, you might refer to certain people or groups who should care about your claims. If sports enthusiasts stop to think about it, many of them might simply assume that the most successful athletes blank. However, new research shows blank. So in this research about fat cells, if you talk about if the reader is overweight, or if the reader knows somebody else who's overweight, then they should be interested in knowing fat is an active toxic element that secretes hormones. Therefore, the less fat a person has, the healthier that person can get, implying that the average obese person would be interested in this information if she wants to stay healthy and live a long life. That's how you get the reader to care, by indicating the real life implications. Instead of just saying the fat cells are inert, now we realize they're not inert. Who cares? Well, if we realize they're not inert and they're actually active, equals you have a really short life if you're obese and overweight. You need to lose weight in order to have that long life because fat cells are toxic. That's why you care. So as the templates suggest, so here these findings challenge neoliberal common assumptions that if fat cells are inert, they are like not toxic. So therefore, if they're toxic, then that means you need to care about it so that you can lose your weight. That's how you get, so as these templates suggest, answering the who cares question involves establishing the type of contrast between what others say and what you say that is central to the book. Ultimately, such templates help to create a dramatic tension or clash of views in your writing that readers will feel invested in and want to see resolved. Although answering the who cares question is crucial, in many cases it is not enough, especially if you are writing to general readers who don't have a strong investment in this particular clash of views. So in the case of Grady's argument about fat cells, such readers may still wonder why it matters that some researchers think fat cells are inert and some are toxic. Or to move to a different field of study, American researchers. So what if some researchers disagree about Huck Finn's relationship with runaway slave Jim in Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? Why should anyone besides a few specialists in the field care about such debates? What, if anything, hinges on them? The best way to answer such questions about the larger consequences of your claim is to appeal to something that your audience already figures to care about, whereas the who cares question asks you to identify an interested person or group. The so what question asks you to link your argument to some larger matter that readers deem important. Thus, in analyzing Huckleberry Finn, a reader would argue that seemingly narrow disputes about the hero's relationship with Jim actually sheds light on whether Twain's widely read novel is a critique of racism in America or is itself marred by it. So if you can link what you're writing to a larger topic at large, in other words, who cares about Huckleberry Finn and his relationship to the slave Jim? But if you can relate that and link it to, well, does that mean that it's racism? So does it mean that America itself is it a critique of racism in America? And then suddenly everybody is interested. That's how you get the so what. It's always about real world implications. So what if anybody cares? What does the reader get out of it? Well, the reader gets out of it, if it's about fat cells, obese readers want to have a longer life. They got to need to know about that. And then with Huckleberry Finn, then if you're a person of color, well, it doesn't really matter, but is racism embedded in America? So, you link whatever it is that you're writing about to a bigger topic at large to get your reader to care about your topic. So, here, internationally, more than 1 billion people are overweight. Obesity and 2 illnesses linked to it. So here, Grady, instead of talking about fat cells, I said that, well, who would care about fat cells? People who are overweight. And since overweight people have lots of illnesses, of course they would want to care about. So if you can link your writing to something that the reader cares about, then you've hooked the reader. That's pathos, okay? That's pathos in a nutshell. And so here are some more templates for establishing why your claim matters. Huckleberry Finn's matters is important because it is one of the most widely read novels in the American school system. Although X may seem trivial, it is in fact crucial in terms of today's concern over, ultimately what is at stake here is, these findings have important implications for the broader domain of, if we are right about blank, then major consequences follow for. These conclusions and this discovery will have significant applications in, as well as in, Although X may seem of concern to only a small group of blank, it should in fact concern anyone who cares about blank. So you can use these templates to tell about, well, why does it matter? Why should I care about your paper? So all these templates help you hook your readers by suggesting the real-world applications of your claims. The templates not only demonstrate that others care about your claim, but also tell your readers why they should care. Again, it bears repeating that simply stating and proving your thesis isn't enough. You also need to frame it in a way that helps readers care about it. And so that's pretty much, that's it for this chapter.